Ari stood in front of the crowded room, eyes scanning the audience, feeling an inexplicable unease creep up his spine. He was about to share something profound. 50 facts about human behavior, facts that had the power to change how people saw themselves and each other. But the truth was, Ari wasn't sure he knew who he was anymore. 4 years, he'd studied behavior, dissected motives, and analyzed emotions. Yet, when faced with the idea of truly understanding himself, it all felt distant, like a puzzle missing its pieces. The room grew silent, waiting. He took a deep breath, forcing his mind to focus. Was he simply a product of the facts he had learned, or something more? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, an image flashed through his mind, the invisible forces that control us all. And in that moment, Ari realized something. The human mind was far more complex than even the most interesting facts could explain. Ari cleared his throat as he stood before the crowd, the soft hum of murmurs in the room fading as he adjusted his glasses. He was about to begin a talk that he had prepared for weeks, a presentation on 50 psychology facts that he believed would change how people understood themselves. Yet, in this moment, Ari felt uneasy, his palms clammy against the podium. The room was full of eager faces, all anticipating his every word, but a thought kept gnawing at him. How much of what I know is just a product of influence? Let's start with something simple, Ari began, his voice steady but not without a hint of uncertainty. Ever noticed how we tend to mimic the people around us, even when we don't realize it? It's called social conformity. We're hardwired to adjust our behavior to match those around us. It's how we blend into society, but it can also be a trap. Ari paced slightly, making sure to maintain eye contact with the audience. In a famous study, participants were asked to match the length of lines on a card. The catch: everyone else in the room, except for the participant, was an actor, and they all gave the wrong answer. Surprisingly, many participants went along with the incorrect answers, even though they knew it was wrong. Why? Because the group's opinion overpowered their own perception. That's the power of influence. Ari paused, thinking about the implications. It's not just about lines on a card. It happens every day. We're influenced by our friends, family, colleagues, even strangers we've never met. It's why we follow trends, adopt habits, and sometimes act in ways we don't fully understand. The desire to belong and fit in is embedded in us. He felt the weight of his own words. Was he just as easily influenced? How much of his career choice, his mannerisms, and even his thoughts were truly his own, and how much were shaped by the environment around him? Ari had spent years studying human behavior, yet this thought lingered at the edge of his mind. Had he ever made a decision for himself? Influence shapes us all, he continued, leaning forward. But it's not always negative. Sometimes we're influenced by positivity, an encouraging word, a smile, a helping hand. But other times, it's more subtle. A product ad, a viral video, or a passing comment can push us in ways we don't realize. Ari stopped for a moment, feeling a shift inside himself. Could it be that his entire career, even his sense of self, was just a series of influence choices? Ari stood at the front of the room, his hands gripped tightly to the podium. His mind was racing, not with the lecture he had planned, but with a deeper question that had started to bubble up. How much of what we do is truly within our control? Let's talk about something a little less obvious, Ari said, trying to focus. I want you to think about the last time you did something you regretted. Maybe it was a snap decision or something you said in the heat of the moment. Now, ask yourself, did you really make that choice consciously? Or was there something else at play? Ari leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd. He felt a sense of unease, like he was about to uncover a truth he wasn't entirely ready for. A lot of the time, our decisions are driven by unconscious forces. And by unconscious, I mean the things that operate outside of our awareness, guiding our actions without us even realizing it. He glanced at his notes, but the words felt hollow, the ideas already churning in his mind. Take the halo effect, for example. This is when we judge a person based on one trait. If they're attractive, we assume they're also kind, smart, and trustworthy. That one characteristic influences how we see everything else about them. It's not something we choose, it just happens. Ari paused and made eye contact with a woman in the front row, who seemed to be lost in thought. He wondered, had she ever been on the receiving end of that? We're all vulnerable to unconscious biases, and they shape how we perceive others, how we interact, even how we choose our friends or partners. He paused again, feeling the weight of the topic settle on him. Here's another one, the mere exposure effect. This is the idea that we tend to develop a preference for things just because we're exposed to them repeatedly. It's why you might start to like a song after hearing it on the radio over and over, even if you didn't like it the first time. It's not a conscious choice. It's just how our minds work. Ari's voice faltered for a moment. This was exactly what bothered him. Was he truly in control of his choices? The more he shared, the more he realized how much of his life had been shaped by forces he hadn't even seen coming. Was he merely a puppet of his past experiences, his biases, his environment? He shook the thought away. We can't control everything, but once we understand these forces, we can start to be more aware of them. But Ari wasn't sure anymore. Did awareness really make a difference if the unconscious was always pulling the strings? Ari stood quietly for a moment, his eyes flicking to the screen behind him, where a new slide appeared, the illusion of choice. He could feel the room's energy shift, the eager faces in the crowd, the anticipation in the air. But the weight of the concept was heavier than he had expected. We like to think we're in control of our choices, Ari began, his voice steady but unsure. That our decisions are based on careful thought, free from any external influence. But research suggests something else. Our minds often decide long before we consciously realize it. And even then, we believe we're in control. He walked slowly across the stage, the spotlight shining bright against his face. One of the most striking examples of this is the placebo effect. It's not just about believing something will work. It's about how believing something will work can actually make it happen. In studies, people have been given sugar pills, told they're taking powerful medicine, and experienced real physical improvements. They didn't make a conscious decision to heal. Their belief was the deciding factor, not their actual choice of treatment. Ari paused, letting the words sink in. The truth is, we're often unaware of the forces shaping our decisions. Our brain takes shortcuts, makes judgments, and acts without us fully processing everything. This is why, when asked to make a choice, we think we're doing it freely. But in reality, many factors have already pushed us in one direction or another. He could feel his pulse quicken, the idea unsettling him more with each word. Take, for example, the concept of priming, when subtle cues influence your behavior. A study showed that people who were exposed to words like old or slow walked more slowly afterward. They didn't consciously decide to move slower. It just happened. Ari adjusted his glasses, his mind swirling. How many of his choices had been influenced by outside forces? How many decisions had he made under the illusion of autonomy, unaware of the subtle nudges guiding him? He thought of his own life, his career choices, his friendships, even his opinions. Was any of it truly his own? He looked out into the crowd, wondering if they were feeling the same disorientation. "We like to believe in free will," he said, the words heavy in the room. "But the more we learn, the more we realize how little control we truly have over our decisions." Ari stopped, caught in the realization. If his choices weren't his own, then who was making them? Ari paused, the weight of his last statement lingering in the room. He could feel a slight tremor in his hands, a disquiet in the pit of his stomach. The idea that so much of what he thought he controlled was an illusion had unsettled him more than he'd anticipated. But the next part of the lecture felt even more unsettling, because it was about something even more unpredictable than the unconscious mind. Emotions. Emotions, Ari began, taking a breath, are powerful forces that drive human behavior. They can make us act in ways that defy all logic and reason. And unlike our conscious decisions, we rarely have full control over them. He paced back and forth as he spoke, trying to work through his own thoughts. Think about fear, for instance. Fear is not a conscious decision. We don't choose to be afraid. It happens in an instant, triggered by something outside of our control. And yet, it can shape our actions, limit our choices, and even alter our perceptions of reality. Ari paused for a moment to let that sink in, then added, "And it's not just fear. Consider love. We think of love as a rational choice, but it isn't. There's a psychological phenomenon called the mere exposure effect, where we develop feelings of affection simply because we've been exposed to someone or something repeatedly. It's not about making a conscious decision. It's about our brain associating familiarity with safety or comfort." Ari glanced at the crowd, wondering how many of them had ever been swept away by emotions in a way that didn't make sense. He could almost hear the thoughts in the room, echoing in his own mind. How often had he let fear dictate his actions? Or love, or anger? Emotions override logic, he continued, because our brains are wired to prioritize emotional responses over rational ones. It's why, in moments of intense stress, we might snap at someone we love, or freeze when we should act. He thought back to his own life, his impulsive decisions made in the heat of anger, or the times he had avoided confrontation because of an overwhelming sense of fear. He felt the growing sense of discomfort as he realized just how many times his emotions had led him down paths he hadn't planned to take. "What's fascinating," Ari said, his voice growing quieter, "is that we often think we're acting logically, when in fact, we're being driven by emotions we can't fully understand. It's like being on autopilot, but not realizing you're not the one holding the wheel." Ari stopped pacing and looked out over the audience. Emotions are real forces, powerful enough to shape our choices, actions, and even our perception of the world. And like all the other forces we've discussed, they're beyond our complete control. He let the silence stretch out, the truth hanging heavily in the air. Emotions were not only shaping his decisions, but also revealing just how much of life was beyond his control. Ari stood still at the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over the audience. His lecture was supposed to offer clarity, to provide insights into the complexities of human behavior. But as he looked out at the eager faces before him, something had shifted inside him. The facts, the studies, the principles, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, left him with an unsettling truth. Understanding behavior wasn't the same as understanding himself. He took a slow breath, his voice softer now, as if he was speaking to himself more than to the crowd. After everything we've talked about, the influence, the biases, the emotions that drive us, there's one thing that none of these facts can fully explain: who we are underneath all of it. Ari paused, considering the weight of the words. We've learned that so much of what we do is shaped by unconscious forces, by things we don't control. We've seen how emotions hijack our decision-making, and how we're influenced by the people and the world around us. But here's the question: if we're not entirely in control of our choices, who are we really? The room was still. Ari felt an odd pull to explore this question himself, as if he was no longer just lecturing, but sharing a vulnerable part of himself with the audience. For years, he continued, I've believed that understanding psychology, breaking down human behavior into these facts and patterns, would give me the answers. I thought that if I could just analyze everything, I'd understand myself, my choices, my motivations. But the more I learned, the more I realized something profound. Understanding the mind doesn't necessarily lead to authenticity. Ari's eyes lingered on a few faces in the crowd, noticing how many of them were nodding. It was as though they too were beginning to feel the truth he had uncovered. What I've come to understand is that authenticity doesn't come from knowing the facts or understanding why we do what we do. It comes from simply being, from embracing the messiness of our emotions, our unconscious influences, and our imperfections. It's about accepting that we might never fully know ourselves, and that's okay. He felt lighter as he spoke. The more I dissected human behavior, the more I lost sight of what it meant to simply live. So, I'm choosing to stop analyzing every moment. I'm choosing to live with the uncertainty, the complexity, and the unpredictability of being human. Because in the end, that's where true authenticity lies. Not in understanding everything, but in accepting it all. Ari took a step back, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't anticipated. The lecture wasn't just about teaching others anymore. It was a moment of personal revelation. Maybe, he said, smiling softly, the most important thing we can learn about human behavior is that it doesn't always need to be explained. Sometimes, it just needs to be experienced.